the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
They are going to trot out a bunch of 5-star corners and safeties, and like there's not going to be some guy that we put out there that's just faster than the man across from him, or that just beats him with inside leverage on a slant every time off the line of scrimmage. And when you are kind of relying on the numbers game, like it's interesting because the way Georgia beat Tennessee in 2022 was they had this light box and they were able to Tennessee and stop the run with the light box when nobody else was able to all year. And they were able, they played inside leverage in the beginning of the game. They took away some of these slants and stuff, and they forced Hendon Hooker into a second read. And it just
so was that just a personnel thing, or like why weren't other teams able to do what Kirby did against Tennessee in 2022?
I think a lot of it's a personnel thing. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I definitely. What was interesting is that the moment that kind of like unlocked things for me in terms of, okay, like I think, because at the moment, like going into that 2022 Georgia Tennessee game, it felt like to everybody that stopped. Like it was this big, scary and it like sit on some of these inside routes and some of the things that they did with Hooker on kind of delayed blitzes, and like you had a spy who was taking off sometimes, like a rat hole kind of coverage guy. And it was just very, very similar to what Georgia ended up doing. But like that to me, I was like, that's the recipe. Like Pitt had the recipe. They just didn't have the personnel to, bring it all the way from oven to table at the condition that you wanted to, because they lost that game in overtime. But I think a lot of it is personnel. And I think that the question is that like when you get to those highest levels of games, occasionally you do have like a Marvin Harrison Jr. or somebody like that, that's just that good. But most of the time I feel like, those games are won in the trenches, and you have a receiver who might get open on one play, but he's not getting open on every play, right? Like it's a back and forth, and it's not just really like this clear matchup advantage. And at that, at position over and over and over, like you got to kind of scheme your way into it. And that's the question. What is Heupel solves? And does Nico open up a new avenue of potential ways for him to kind of solve that problem? And I think if he lets Nico play outside the rules of that system in a way that's different than he did with Hendon Hooker, then the answer to that could be yes. And I thought that was sort of the biggest weakness that I saw in 2022 Tennessee, was that there was a ton of predictability to it. And so, if you got to a team that was able to stop what you do, then what happens next? And we never really found out, honestly. Like we never saw the answer to that. It was just kind of like, well, we're going to keep trying to do what we do, and hopefully it's going to break through eventually. And it never really did against Georgia in that game. But does Nico's legs open up a new element? Does he extend plays? Like what's the story there? And that's the fascinating side of this.
Well, it's the combination of his because I think Nico, one of the more frustrating things about Joe last year was that Joe had one of the reasons Tennessee was up and had Alabama on their toes again, this time in Tuscaloosa last year, was like Joe was taking off and they were running some RPO stuff, and Joe was, they were doing some speed option stuff. Like Joe was just flat out running and lowering his shoulder and just taking a toll on dudes, because Joe's size was like, he's built like Cam Newton, but he just didn't do it. And he also just didn't have that kind of instinct to know when to take off like Hendon did. Hendon just knew when things were over and was like, all right, I'm going to go get this first down. Like the all-time annoying guy who just absolutely crushed Tennessee with this 3 years ago now, because time flies, was Matt Corral. The Ole Miss Tennessee game was a masterclass in nothing being there.
That was a great game in general, yeah.
It was a great game and normal ending and all that good stuff. But Matt Corral would just live for 4th and 6 and 3rd and 8, and would just find ways to just dance around and still get the first down and live to fight another day. there wasn't a lot of live to fight another day last year, where the drives ended quickly. And one of the things I'd written down, because I think a lot of people were excited about Milton after a good Orange Bowl performance against Clemson. But the problem was, like, one of the different things that stood out to me was, like, he took a lot of sacks. It was like, that's something that was a little different than Hooker. And he also had a lot of quick 3 and outs. Like, that was one of those things where if the guys were open and like, one of the things with Tennessee to this point, I think what's going to be different this year is just they're so deep on the defensive line. I think the defense has progressively gotten a little bit better each year under Tim Banks and company, and they hired well. Like, William Inge was a good defensive coordinator at Washington, like bringing him in as linebackers coach and working with Tim Banks. Like, that's a big win. Rodney Gardner, that you know well, he's one of the best defensive line coaches in the sport. Like, he's been extremely good. William Martinez, also an old friend, back at Georgia. He's recruited well, and Kamal Hadden obviously broke out and was good for them last year, but they're getting more talent in the secondary. The thing I look at it is like, okay, you can't have those kind of quick 3 and outs with the kind of defensive personnel they had last year, because they just get themselves in a hole and they just could not get off the field on 3rd down. And when you have an offense that can quickly go 3 and out, and the defense that's on the field as much as Tennessee is, it's just a recipe for issues. And they had that all year long. And this year, I think what's going to be different in a lot of ways, and maybe the best reasons for optimism, is like, I think Nico is going to extend a lot of drives. Like, I think Nico is going to be in a lot of spots where you're not going to have a lot of those quick 3 and outs. And then you're like, all right, defense, bend, don't break, just get us back on the field for another opportunity. I think Nico is going to find ways to extend drive, but you're also going to have to balance. And this is something that Tennessee had to be very careful with Hendon 2 years ago, is like, yeah, he's great with his legs, but you have to pick your spots. Like, Hendon did not run against every team. You have to be careful. It's like Florida, sorry, buddy, you got to take off. Alabama, you're going to have to take off and take these hits and get back up. I think he lost like 4 teeth or something in the Alabama game in 2021 off a bad hit. Like, you're gonna have to take some shots in these big spots. And Nico, we haven't seen that. Like, Iowa, like, he ran all over Iowa, but he didn't really take any big hits. He took some sacks, but it wasn't all that physical. It's a bowl game. It's, we don't have to relitigate what a bowl game is now, a non-playoff game. I am curious how Tennessee handles that, because they're really young behind him, obviously, with Jake Mergulator, a true freshman, and then Gaston Moore, former walk-on, who transferred in with Heupel when he came over from UCF. But like, it's going to be very interesting, because you have to keep him healthy, and you also have to run him. And that's something we saw last year in this offense, and I wonder if you agree, is that, like, I don't know if this works without a non-dual threat quarterback. Like, you just have to have somebody who is comfortable and has good instincts on when to take off. I don't think you can have a stationary prototypical drop back passer in this offense and expect to really unlock everything I don't know. Do you agree?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can have a true straight up drop back passer much anywhere in college at this point. Like,
Michael Penix Jr. last year CJ Stroud was basically doing that. He at Ohio State. There's been dudes who still do that.
But like, CJ Stroud also like used his legs in the 4th quarter of that Georgia game and put them in position to kick a game-winning field goal with like a 36-yard run. Like, he didn't like to, but he could when the chips were down. Carson Beck, I think, is certainly a pocket passer, but like, he will keep it on his own read occasionally just to keep you honest. That's really what you need. I agree with you. I think you have to have some level of mobility. Like, you don't maybe have to be a true dual threat, but like Drew Lock, right? Like, he was super successful in a Heupel offense. Mackenzie Milton, right? Like, those guys, like, do I think of them as like the model of a dual threat quarterback? No, like, they're not Michael Vick or anything, but they do have some athleticism, certainly. What concerns me about Nico, quite frankly, is you're right. We did see him run against Iowa, and he ran beautifully. Like, he did that very, very well. And, I think the interesting thing was there were some designed runs in the game for him. It wasn't just all him like taking off on a scramble. I think what scares me for him, and like, I think what needs to be answered for him.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.